Hello, lords and ladies, it is I, Sir Gwaine Evermere, and as you can tell by the title, I am not the biggest fan of Fate's adaptation of Mordred. Now, before we go any further, I want to say you're obviously allowed to disagree with me here. If you like Fate's Mordred, more power to you. Don't let me or my video stop you from enjoying this character. This is just merely my opinion on Fate's adaptation of Mordred. That being said, I heavily disagree with Mordred's portrayal here. In watching her on screen, she is a fun character, and I do love her roguish knight charm. She was easily the best part of Apocrypha, hands down, and her dynamic with the Master, the Necromancer, was amazing. I honestly think she should have just been the main focus of Apocrypha instead of Jeanne d'Arc. That being said, not once did I ever really look at her and go, yeah, that's Mordred from Arthurian legend, like I did with other characters such as Arthurian. But why? Why was she just so foreign to me in Fate? Well, let's start with something. I'm going to show you some of the Knights of the Round Table in Fate, and I want you to list them from the strongest and most skilled to the weakest and least skilled. Your list might look something a bit like this, as this roughly seems to be the main consensus of the skill or strength of the Knights of the Round Table in Fate. Now obviously you might swap a few characters around, but still. Now do the same concept, but with the characters of original Arthurian legend. Notice any particular differences? Yeah, Mordred's usually near the top, as Mordred is meant to be one of the most skilled knights of the Round Table. Fate, on the other hand, has her near the middle to lower. This creates several problems, as well as just undermining Mordred as a threat, but I'll touch on that in just a second. In Arthurian legend, Arthur is not meant to be a powerful knight. He's meant to be a above average, in terms of skill, knight. Excalibur is what pushed him to be considered a formidable threat, which makes sense. Arthur is a king first and a knight second. Arthur's strength isn't the edge of his blade, but the weight of his crown. So, in his final fight with Mordred, the emotional impact of that fight was that we knew realistically Mordred should win. Yes, Mordred is tired from fighting the other knights to get to Arthur, but he's in another league compared to Arthur. So Arthur being disarmed and forced to the ground fills us with dread as we're rooting for Arthur, and when he stabs Mordred, we breathe a sigh of relief as the threat is gone. Before Mordred, with every last ounce of his strength, slams his foot down and swings his blade, screaming in a final act of defiance against King Arthur, leaving the final fight feeling impactful. But in Fate, what do we have exactly? We knew immediately off the bat that Mordred is completely and utterly outclassed by Arthurian, and it shows us exactly that. The fight feels like as if Arthurian isn't even taking Mordred seriously. I get this is meant to be showing us Mordred's perspective, so we're meant to be rooting for Mordred. However, if that's the case, why did they rob Mordred of her moment? Her crowning achievement, the feat that pushed Mordred from being a random treacherous knight into being a legend. Mordred killed the once and future king, the unkillable king of destiny, but in Fate, she didn't. In Fate, she just died. Yes, her corpse was puppeteered into killing Arthurian, but that then means Mordred never really even landed a blow on Arthurian. It just makes Mordred feel pathetic. Makes her rebellion, her defiance, just feel worthless. Arthurian didn't even take her seriously, and just one-shot her with her spear. And in doing so, robbed Mordred of her moment. So, how did she get to Camelon? She had to defeat the remaining Knights of the Round Table. How? Answer? We don't know. They skipped that. Is that because they knew it didn't make any sense? Now, to be fair to Fate, there are some versions in which Mordred is a pretty average to even a pretty bad knight, yet still got to Camelon. Well, how did he do it in that? Simple. These versions of Mordred are manipulators who turn the Knights of the Round Table and other knights against each other, as well as using underhanded tactics to win, such as poisoning or backstabbing and so on. So does that explain it? Well, no. Because it's made pretty clear in Fate that Mordred dislikes people who use underhanded tactics, often calling them cowards. But, okay. Somehow, she got to Camelon. despite not being strong enough to get there and not willing to use underhanded tactics, so maybe she got super lucky. Or something. Why does it matter? Mordred should feel like a threat. Mordred should feel significant. Yet it feels as if the plot itself has to keep making up reasons for her to be able to do what her legend counterpart could do on his own. Mordred kills Arthur through sheer willpower, but Fate's Mordred died and needed a curse to do it. Mordred, through intelligently placed skirmishes and his skill, manages to best the knights of the Round Table, as well as divide their army. Fate's Mordred just got lucky, I suppose. We don't get given an explanation. With the point so far, they could just add more context or properly explore the downfall of Camelot, which I would love for them to do, by the way. But now onto my actual issues with Fate's Mordred, the first of which being Mordred's motivation in Fate. In Fate, Mordred's reasoning for hating Arthur is drastically different to Arthurian legend, despite technically hitting most of the key points. As many people have talked about Mordred in Fate, she does technically hit all the points from Mordred, the main basics, the who, what, when, and where. However, a key distinction is the why. As yes, Mordred was a good knight who served and idolized Arthur. He loved him. He was everything he wanted to be. The once and future king, the legendary man of myth and legend. Yet he's kind, good-hearted, and humble. The very idea of someone like that existing made Mordred outright reject Morgana's pessimistic worldview, as she tried to turn him to his side but was kept at bay by the idea of someone like Arthur, until Mordred discovered the truth, that he is the son of Arthur. From that, everything crumbles. However, in Fate, the reasoning's a bit different. In Fate, Mordred's overjoyed when he finds out, running straight to Arturia to declare it. However, Arturia rejects her, which leads to a violent outburst, which is understandable, but in legend, he begins falling to Morgana's words. He doesn't confront Arthur, as he feels betrayed. Did Arthur know about him? That he had a child out of wedlock, and then abandoned it? And all the faults of Camelot began resurfacing. Only 2 knights out of all of Camelot could even attempt the Holy Grail quest, as all the others were deemed unfit. Only 2 knights out of 250. Not even Arthur was considered worthy. The affair Guinevere had with Lancelot, all of this takes that admiration, that love Mordred had for Arthur, and poisons it. As his idolization of Arthur is what caused his overwhelming hatred. As to Mordred, Arthur was an anchor of hope to him, faith that the world was still good, that's still kind, that his mother, who tells him the world is poison and cruel, is wrong, just turned out to be like everyone else, and at that breaks him. In Fate, however, it's understandable why she had an outburst, as being rejected in such a way is incredibly hard for a normal person, and I fully understand that. However, Mordred is a knight of the Round Table. A knight of the Round... She isn't an ordinary soldier, she isn't a peasant, she isn't a normal knight, she is a knight of the Round Table. For those who aren't aware, being the Knight of the Round Table isn't just a meeting between the strongest knights of Camelot. The knights who get a seat at the table shape Camelot. They are given deep and thorough educations of diplomacy, economics, politics, stewardship, resource management, and so on. As the knights are a counsel for the king, you need to understand the kingdom properly, which is where my issue lies with Fate's Mordred. She should be aware of the impact such a declaration could have. In the past, people have been executed on the spot for even making such a declaration. As if that gets heard by the wrong ears, it could collapse an entire kingdom. So she shouldn't be surprised that Arturia rejects her, especially when she's making the declaration in the middle of the Round Table. Although that might just be an apocrypha design choice, and they made a mistake. She should be massively aware what that kind of accusation could do to Camelot. At best, no one believes Mordred. At worst, wars break out. Mass mutiny, as they don't see Arturia as worthy of the crown anymore. Now, to be fair here, I do understand the point of view that this makes Mordred more relatable compared to her more legend counterpart. And that's fair, when it comes down to your own personal experiences. However, I do believe this makes Mordred a much weaker character in my eyes, just for the sake of having her be more relatable. as his motivation in Arthurian legend was about his entire worldview being corrupted. The man he looked up to ideologically backstabbed him. Everything he believed crumbled around him compared to fate. Yes, being so harshly projected by a parental figure is hard and a bit crushing, but it also feels a lot less impactful compared to the original. Although this just come down to your personal experiences and opinions, so Clarent in Fate is probably the most uninteresting I've seen it, as unfortunately it's just Excalibur, but worse, which is unfortunate as Fate is often quite good at making interesting abilities for weapons and characters. Clarent is often one of two things in legend, either A, a sword Mordred stole from Arthur's armory which is symbolic for peace and often has no magical effects, or B, a sword forged from Caliburn or another sword, and enchanted by Morgana to best King Arthur. It seems Fate has kind of mixed the two, but mostly gone with the latter, which unfortunately makes Morgana look quite a bit foolish in Fate. Hello, future Gwaine here. I said Morgana enchanted Clarent, as Fate seems to be a bit vague as to its origins. I keep finding conflicting answers. Some saying it's Mordred, others saying Morgana enchanted it, but Mordred's hate fuels it. It would make sense if Morgana enchanted it, given that's what the case usually happens in legend, but even if it was Mordred herself who corrupted the sword, then apply everything I'm about to say to Mordred instead of Morgana. As in legend, she's aware that attempting to fight Excalibur in raw power is a terrible idea, as it's just the strongest sword you can get, so she often finds a clever way around it, such as a sword that disables magical effects in an area, or a sword that can negate armor, or so on. But in Fate, she does try to compete with Excalibur in raw power, which is obviously a bad idea, and it's obvious the show agrees with this, as Mordred in their fight with Arturia doesn't even bother to attempt to use Clarent Blood Arthur's noble phantasm, as I'm guessing even she knows that attempting that would result in Arturia doing the same and completely overpowering Mordred. And again, this goes back to the skill problem. Mordred's meant to be more skilled than Arthur, so Clarent turning Excalibur basically into another sword flips the battle in his favour massively. As for alternate ideas for Clarent, there's a lot of cool ideas they could have gone with, as they could lean more into it being forged by a witch, add an element of dark magic, such as having Mordred use her own blood to activate a curse on whoever the blade hits, or perhaps the blade absorbs mana, so if Arturia attempted to use Excalibur's noble phantasm, she can't, as it works by absorbing mana in the area, but if Clarent removes all the mana in the area, she can't charge Excalibur. You could have restrictions to this to make it more fair and balanced, but these are just random ideas I came up with in a few minutes. I'm sure Fate could come up with a much better and more interesting and creative idea than I could. So it's just a bit disappointing that they left it so basic. It just makes it feel very boring. Now, Mordred's design is, interesting. So obviously this isn't historically accurate at all, but that doesn't actually matter, as neither is Arturia's dress, as the shoulders are more from the Victorian era, despite King Arthur being from the 5th to 7th century, as well as the high collar of the dress being, which would be a thing until like the 15th to 17th century, and I'm rambling, I apologise, but you get my point. Her dress isn't historically accurate, but it matches the knightly aesthetic enough to be fine. However, Mordred, her outfit is just bizarre. No human being, let alone a knight, would wear this daily. Also, Arturia is shown to like being a woman. She hides it, yes, but she often chooses to wear feminine clothing, as she does like being a woman, she just has to hide it due to the political landscape. However, Mordred is shown to outright hate being a woman. She is sickened by the very idea as being seen as a woman, as she often equates it to weakness due to her upbringing. Yet, she dresses femininely. Even her biker outfit, which in concept should have been amazing, as it's a great contrast between Arturia's more modest choice of casual attire, but they just couldn't help themselves. They had to make it feminine, which goes against her character, and her under armour is massively over-sexualized for no reason. She's basically shirtless, even though both Mordred and all of Camelot are devout Christians, and would have seen what Mordred is wearing as degenerate, as well as her skirt ribbons, which must defy the laws of physics in order not to show her undergarments whenever she moves. Okay, when designing a character, you need to make sure that design portrays its character. If you want an example of this, take Arturia. Her main outfit is her wearing what's basically a ball gown dress, which is imprisoned by her armour, This works perfectly within her character. Someone that yearns to be herself, yet feels the need to trap herself in her knightly charade. Then compare this to Mordred. What are we meant to take away from this design? That she's a rebellious teen? I mean, sure, but they went about this in the most backwards way, as it actively diminishes her character in Fate. She's meant to yearn for Arthuria's validation, yet she dresses like that, in a Christian culture. As for her actual armor, it's a bit much. It's overly bulky and super detailed, akin to something like a mecha, which on its own wouldn't be horrible, but considering this is meant to be from the same time period as Arturia, it feels incredibly jarring and just wrong. It creates an inconsistent artistic style for the Arthurian legend characters, as Arturia feels a lot more grounded feeling compared to the overly high-tech Mordred. I understand this was made to make Mordred stand out and feel more ominous, as straight and more jagged shapes and lines which are used in mecha do make a character feel more sinister. However, there's a line between making a character feel more sinister and making them feel as if they're from a separate time period. If I put Arturia next to Mordred, you wouldn't be able to tell they're from the same show, let alone the same time period as Arturia, as well as probably the worst thing they added to her armor, that turned my mild disinterest of Mordred into outright annoyance. Why? This is meant to be a knight. A knight. You turned her into Iron Man. I'm assuming this was done because they wanted to make Mordred's face visible for emotional scenes, and having to animate her taking it off all the time would be annoying. However, Fate already has a solution to this. Okay, Arturia and other servants can turn their armor or weapons to dust to unburden themselves. Why couldn't she just do that with the helmet? And you know what the worst of it is? They had a design that would have worked perfectly. That would have fit the artistic style of the Arturia's Camelot, as well as feeling like a knight and not a mecha. It was the original design for Mordred in Fate. Okay, I've been a bit harsh in this video. I do still like Mordred in Fate, but again, she just doesn't feel like a Mordred to me. You're free to disagree with me here, and obviously this just comes down to your opinion on the character. But to me, it feels too foreign. Now, I understand in this video it seems like I hate Mordred and Fate, but to be honest with you, the main feeling I have towards this is disappointment. I love Fate. I think that they've done an amazing job with a lot of characters, so it pains me that Mordred wasn't one of them. I would have loved someone to retort all my points and make me like Fate's Mordred as I want to. However, I can't say that I like this interpretation of Mordred. I like them as a character, as if they were a completely separate character, unconnected to Mordred. I might actually quite like them, but I just can't see this as Mordred to me.